Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. DeppHerd35, Rachel Tries Hard says, I think people overestimated what Amber went through and underestimated what Johnny went through, largely due to gender bias and IPV. I really had to take a look at that within myself during this case, even though I am fully aware that DV has no gender. People keep talking about how men can be abused, but it's more common for women. I'm not questioning that if that's actually true, or if men are just likely to report it. End of comment. Yeah, three things. One is that it seems to be true. If you believe that Johnny was victimized, or at the very least that Amber Heard wasn't a clear victim in the relationship, then it seems as though because of people's assumptions about gender and IPV, that there was a lot of overestimating of what Amber went through and underestimating what Johnny went through. Absolutely. The second thing is the prevalence rate. What is the prevalence of intimate partner violence victimization regarding gender? It's hard to know because we have to get people to self-report, which is complicated by people sometimes lying, or they don't feel safe to say yes on a survey, or they literally don't even know that they were a victim, because a lot of victims, regardless of gender, but particularly men, don't even know that they were victimized. Most of the male victims that I've worked with didn't even know that they were a victim until I said, you were a victim of abuse. And they would say, especially in an intimate relationship. So what will we find? You know, if a God could look down and just measure the prevalence regarding gender, what would it be? I don't know, but could it be 50-50? It could be. But it's likely 60-40 or something like that because of what I know and gather from the research, but also because at the very least men are socialized to be more aggressive and more dominant in relationships, and so that probably will tip the scales. So there's that. The third thing is that it's one thing to intellectually know something, it's another thing to know it in your heart. So most of us intellectually understand that men can be victims, but not many of us actually know of it in our hearts because we haven't experienced it, or we didn't know we were experiencing it. We haven't seen it in real life. It's similar to racism. It's one thing to know that everyone is equal. It's another thing to really know it in your heart. You know, you'll hear people say this. They'll say, you know, I'm not a racist. You know, everyone's equal. But when the rubber meets the road and they're actually faced with a decision, like a hiring decision, they either unknowingly or knowingly make a decision based on race, even though they would claim that they're not racist. You know, they'll make excuses. So it's one thing to know that men can be abused. It's another thing to really know it and to live from that assumption. And there isn't a lot of people in that space because there's not a lot of opportunity for people to understand that this actually happens in real life. We hardly ever, if ever, depict it. And two, like I said, a lot of male victims don't even know they're being victimized and won't even come forward. DeppHerd36, by the way, I want to give a shout out to CatEffects Art and Chris, who are both giving timestamps to a lot of my videos. I've always wanted someone to do that because I tried to do that early on this podcast, and it just takes too much time, and it would basically mean I wouldn't be able to produce as much content as I do. And so I made a judgment call and said, you know, I just won't do that. And when CatEffects Art and Chris started actually timestamping things, I was just like, oh, and then so I try to pin it to the top. And if you could actually thank them, because they're just volunteering their time, it takes time. You know, they've got to press the buttons and type everything in. And they're doing that for you. So you want to be thankful to them. DeppHerd36, Do Wen Fan says, I think it's important that you go back and watch the witnesses' testimonies, especially so I won't read the rest of the comment. I don't know about Doe's being nice, but a lot of other people are attacking me. That's a strong word, but I'm going to use it on YouTube for missing certain sections or forgetting certain things or doing things out of order. And what I'll say is I'm really trying hard. I'm not purposely missing anything. I forget things. I have a bias. We all have a bias, so maybe that's at play at times. But I'm really trying my best. So if people want to remind me about something, totally fine. Or, hey, you missed that one thing. Remember that thing, totally fine. It's all about tone. Some people are criticizing me like I'm this jerkface for forgetting something or not commenting. Because the other thing is that there are many sections of the trial that I'm not reacting to and posting because there's not much I can say, like the police officer's testimony. I watched it, but I didn't think there was anything I could offer to the public. And the purpose of this series is not to provide a document of the trial. You can watch the trial yourself, right? I am providing a psychological expertise commentary to the trial. And, there's whole sections, for example, where they're talking about media analysis, and I don't have anything to say to that. So I don't publish anything to that. I think it'd be wasting your time for me to say something like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Watch 5 more minutes. Huh, interesting. I just don't think you come here for that mundanity. So the fact that I didn't react to it, or maybe I forgot it, I'm only human. Some of y'all know this forwards and backwards and are living in this world all day long. I don't. I dip into the trial. I'm doing other things. I'm living the rest of my life. I have my practice. I'm a professor. I have a whole other podcast series that I'm doing all the time. And so I don't live in the data. And it's fine to suggest. It's fine to even be kind of frustrated that I forgot something. It's nothing to attack me as if I'm somehow like this incompetent a-hole or something. I don't like the tone that some people have. I'm just like, and it's not just one person. It's a minority of people on YouTube, but there's a group of them. And I read, someone even paid money to have a super thanks comment so that I would see it more likely, and I did, and it hurt my feelings. It kind of ruined my day. It's kind of ruined my past few days, honestly. It's hurtful. It's sort of like you're running this marathon, and there's people occasionally cheering on the runners, and they're like, go, you're doing great. And it's hard, you're working, and then all of a sudden just someone comes out of the blue and stands in your way and says like, you're stupid, that outfit is dumb, why are you running? Like, just stop. You just want to stop. You just want to stop doing the marathon. You just want to walk away. You're like, yeah, okay. And so when I'm trying, and I'm like really just putting in all this effort because I have to get ready for it. I have to watch the trial. Sometimes I have to rewatch sections over and over again because I'm not understanding what's happening. Of course, I have to record it. I have to format the video. I have to edit it, which takes hours and hours and hours. I have to post it. I have to review it, and Stacy reviews it. And there's just this whole process. And then people come out and say like I'm this complete idiot for missing something. And I'm like, what did I miss? And I'm thinking, well, come on, like I'm trying. Like I'm one human being, I don't have a team of researchers that are helping me out with this. So, I'm frustrated and it hurts. I guess that's all I'm saying. Y'all aren't doing that to me, I'm guessing, but some are. And so if you've ever been frustrated, I really am sorry. I am. But I'm trying, and I'm a human being. I have flaws, I guess, so anyway, it hurts my feelings. E says, observe is my favorite body language analysis. He's very transparent. Yeah. So I don't know if I've talked about it in these videos, but I've been pretty heavily critical of body language expertise because anecdotally, I've been observing this kind of expertise for decades. And every time I saw someone claiming that they understood body language and they were making completely unscientific, pseudoscientific claims that they can read people's mind based on body language and eye movement, neurolinguistic programming. There's just so much pseudoscience and bullcrap. There's a little bit of truth to NLP's claims, but the vast majority of the way I see it being utilized is complete crap. And so I was just blanketly calling all of it that. But then I actually decided for myself, I was like, well, if I'm going to criticize them, I should probably actually watch someone on YouTube. And I watched a couple channels on YouTube, and I was really pleasantly surprised by how responsible they were about their claims. They would couch it all in speculation. They would provide kind of multiple sides to it. They actually used research regarding body language effectively. And it's similar to the things that I would say, actually, instead of the way that, at least for me, typically it's presented. Emails regarding the trial. Deserving listener Louise from the UK, who I believe I've communicated with in the past a number of times, says, should Johnny and Amber's couples counselor have been treating them if there is IPV in the relationship? I'm a domestic violence advisor in the UK, and we always advise against couples counseling when there's IPV. Our reasons are because the abuser will continue to abuse through therapy and use what is said in therapy against the victim later on. In couples therapy, the focus is on the relationship, so there's an assumption that each person contributes to the negative or toxic behavior, and both people need to address their issues rather than identifying the perpetrator. If the therapist felt the relationship was abusive in any way, should she have ended the therapy sessions? End of question. Yeah, so very complicated topic, lots to say. But yeah, generally speaking, when in doubt, we want to avoid couples therapy when there is a hint of IPV or known IPV because of the reasons you said. But having said that, we can, and I can, and have treated couples with IPV and abuse effectively because I don't have the things that, the reasons. So you're saying that, the abuser will continue to abuse through therapy. Well, that assumes that the couples therapist doesn't understand how to detect that and account for that. So, and adjust. So if I start to see evidence, for example, just again, this is a long topic. I could lecture about this for 20 hours. But one example, one method that is used is often if I detect any kind of hint of this, which I usually can see it pretty easily right off the bat, is I will have individual sessions with both people, and then I'll be pretty inviting of what I believe to be the victim to tell me in private. So I'll be meeting alone with what I believe is the victim, and I'll say things like, so I just want to tell you right off the bat, I'm detecting signs that you might be a victim of intimate partner violence, of domestic violence, and I don't want to pressure you to tell me if anything is happening, but I want to create a space where you can tell me because it's important that we change that for a variety of reasons, not only because victims deserve to be safe and to not be abused, but also because perpetrators don't often know what they're doing, and they're often sabotaging themselves by becoming a perpetrator. So it would really be helping both people if we introduce this topic. But if you don't want to tell me, and this is all completely me yammering for a while before they even say anything, because I want them to know the full landscape, I would say if you tell me that you are a victim of abuse, or you're questioning that, I would enter into multiple sessions with you alone and with your partner alone, and conjoint sessions, and you and I would explore it in all the time that you felt necessary. I might also recommend you talk to an individual therapist and a DV specialist, advocate person. But that's up to you. And we would only go at your pace, and it takes a long time, but I want to make sure that everyone's safe. I would also do a threat assessment of guns and alcohol and other kinds of things just to make sure that everyone's safe. And if you told me that you were abused, I would go to your partner and I wouldn't blast them, but I have a way of talking to perpetrators because I've treated many perpetrators and couples with perpetration, that I would talk to your partner in a way that would be extremely inviting for them to be able to come forward and admit that they have been abusive, because I don't want to alienate that person. I want this to get better, and if that's going to happen, then I need to be in very good relationship with both of you. So, are you being abused? Do you feel safe? Has there been any violence? Has there been any threats? Has there, what's happening in the situation? Have you ever called the police? That kind of thing. And then we would start down a road. So, your assumption that the abuser will continue to abuse through the couples therapy is not true for specialists in IPV that use couple therapy. It's this assumption that somehow couples therapists just don't even understand IPV, which is just not true, particularly today. Can some therapists, regardless of what modality, including couples therapy, be oblivious to IPV? Absolutely. So, but it's not automatic. The other thing that you say here is that in couples therapy, the focus is on the relationship, so there's an assumption that each person contributes to the pattern. That is also not true. Every responsible couples therapist understands that it's nuanced, and there are times when the power relationship is such that one person is creating all the problems based on their abuse and their power grabbing, and the other person is powerless and being abused and not a part of the problem. historically in systems theory, in couples therapy, was that true? Kind of, not entirely. It's hard to know exactly in the 70s and 80s, but there were purists in my field that absolutely would blame victims and say that they're absolutely playing an equal part in the abusive relationship. And that's a problem. We've reevaluated that in my field for decades now. And every responsible couples therapist, well supervised, well trained, understands that we want to first assess for a power differential. And if there isn't a significant one, then we want to go off the assumption that each person is contributing their part. So there's that. Now, when in doubt, should you avoid couples therapy? Yeah, but it's not necessary every time. The other thing is that it's not that I would just isolate the couple, right? I would refer and have individual therapy, particularly for the victim. I might even, and I have recommended perpetrators actually go to specialist treatment for perpetration. And, anyway, there's various different things that are good for that. Obviously, DV advocacy. I would sit them down and talk about a safety plan. I would talk about, tell the perpetrator, if your partner feels threatened, then I am telling the two of you that it's viable for either one of you, if you feel unsafe, to call the police. So do not bar someone from leaving the room or the house. Do not prevent someone from calling the cops. Do not prevent someone from calling a friend. If someone wants to cut off communication, you must abide. Just imagine how quickly, if they're both on board, we could actually change the abuse in the relationship. Now, the victim might still want to leave, but at the very least, they both deserve to heal and recover and change. Now, it takes a very, it's a very delicate and diplomatic process when I'm trying to invite the perpetrator into a conversation that they are a perpetrator, but I've done that hundreds of times. I've gone down that road, and I'm pretty confident in my ability to navigate those waters because I've seen it work so many times. And I operate on the assumption, because it's so often true, that the perpetrator actually doesn't want to be abusive. They don't wake up in the morning and be like, yay, I'm an abusive person, I want to abuse my partner. They're utilizing abuse because they're desperate for attachment security, and they have no other way of managing that because that's what they learned, or that's how they were treated, or whatever. It doesn't justify it at all. It's horrible, and I've seen it, and we've all heard it in this trial. But so there's that. Yeah. And I will also say that the dogma in my field that couples therapy is always contraindicated in these situations is harmful to clients, because there are some people that would really benefit from that. And to just write it off as dogma, just like you can never do couples therapy when there's IPV, is harmful to people. We have to accept that there's a lot of different options and a lot of benefits to various different kinds of therapy. And I also find that it's sort of trying to relegate couples therapy into this really small camp. It's like, well, that's only for communication. It's like, no. In fact, another assumption that you had here is that therapy is about the relationship. Couples therapy, the focus is on the relationship. That's not necessarily true. I've treated couples where the focus was on both of their childhoods and not their relationship. Their relationship is affected by their childhoods and their schemas, but my focus is on each one of their relational traumas. So couples therapy is a lot of things. It's just two clients in a room. That's all that it is. So all things are possible in that configuration. But yeah, is it something? And I get hot under the collar about it because, as a couples therapist for 25 years, who has constantly heard from people around me that I'm not supposed to be treating couples with intimate partner violence, but and I would abide by that for many years. And then finally I'm like, I think I can actually manage this. I don't think the dogma makes sense. I have a lot of experience treating perpetrators. I know how to talk to them. I know how to deprogram them. I feel like I'm perfectly situated to help these people. And I will absolutely refer out, and I absolutely will have a team approach this. But so I'm supposed to terminate. Plus, I could be 9 months into the therapeutic relationship and discover that there's IPV, and I just have to cut it off and be like, you have to go away. I mean, maybe there's a transition, but it just never felt right to me. For another therapist, for another couples therapist, if that's their boundary, totally fine. Absolutely. You should have that in your disclosure. You should tell people right away, by the way, if there's any kind of disclosure of intimate partner violence, I have to refer you, because you don't want to start with a couple and have that happen later on. And they're like, well, I thought we could talk about this here. And you're like, nope, can't talk about, so you need to tell them really, really clearly up front. Anyway, so yeah, again, I could talk about this for 10 hours or plus. There's a lot of nuances to this, but I hope that gets my point across. Deserving listener Rebecca from Connecticut emailed in and says, is there any way to tell if the person being evaluated is distorted due to a personality disorder? So to answer this question, it's hard to tell. So what you're asking, I think, in relation to the trial is, with Amber Heard, she might have a personality disorder and as a result might be distorted in terms of her perception, and will thus report things that she believes to be deeply true but are not true. And is it possible, is there any way to detect that distortion? Not an easy way, that's for sure, especially in the short term. You do have the MMPI, MCMI, the PEI, other kinds of tests like that might help, but for me, I figure things out along those lines over time. And I'm never really quite sure, particularly if it's individual therapy, right? Now, if it's couple or family therapy, I have a much easier time because I can actually talk to those people and say, like, is that what you were? And then I'll get their story and I can sort of piece together what I think happened. But you never know. It's just, you're not there, so it is hard to tell. But the point of therapy is that we don't necessarily have to know what exactly happened. We have goals, and someone with borderline comes to me and I wonder if they're distorting something that went on at home. I wouldn't, it doesn't matter if they're distorted or not per se. It matters what the goals of therapy are. I'm trying to help them heal from their past. I'm trying to help them regulate their emotions. I'm trying to raise questions, like, let's say an individual person with borderline comes in and says, I got in a fight with my wife and she said this and she said that. And I'm wondering, is that a distortion? And say, okay, that sounds, first I had to empathize and validate. And that might take a long time. And then I might say, well, so, and this is further into the therapy, sometimes given your schemas, you can be triggered and thus see things in a different way than what other people might see it. And you might blow things out of proportion a little bit. And that's totally normal. If you did that, how would that have played out? I'm not saying that happened in this moment, but if you did, what might be happening right now? What might be a little bit overblown? Not completely wrong, but what might be a little, amplified by the triggering that you went through at the time. And so we'd enter into a conversation. They'd be like, well, what do you mean? I'd be like, well, when you said that your wife was saying this, this, and that, I wonder if you misinterpreted it based on your traumas of the past. I don't know. What do you think? So I'm asking the client to ask a question, am I distorted? In fact, that's a big part of my model of treating people with personality disorders is I don't tell them that they're distorted. I tell them there's a question mark for everyone, particularly people with schemas and histories and personality disorders. There's a question mark. And one of the wisest things we can do as human beings is raise a question mark, not to put us down, not to say we're wrong or we're distorted, but to say, am I distorted? It's similar to racism. One of the wisest things you can do about any of the isms, classism, ageism, sexism, is not to say that was racist or that wasn't racist, is to say, maybe that was racist. I don't know. We can't know because we don't know why we do anything, but we can raise the question, add it to the discourse. That's where wisdom and change happens. Anyway, do you ever have to gauge whether there is mutual abuse versus one main abuser during couple counseling? Yeah, absolutely. That's a major focus. I usually assume that it's unidirectional until it's proven clearly otherwise. But yeah, absolutely. If IPV is happening in a couple, I absolutely try to figure out who is the perpetrator, who's the victim. Do you think this trial, being so publicized, could further the stigmatization of borderline and histrionic? Yeah, particularly because a lot of people hate Amber with a passion, and if they associate her and their hatred of her with borderline and histrionic, then absolutely it raises stigmatization. But it's possible that overall this raises awareness of borderline and histrionic, but I don't know. It's hard to say. I doubt that this trial helps us regarding stigmatization. Anonymous patron from Arizona wrote in, and she says, went to the website, contact button, filled out the form. Listening to your episode this morning about Depp v. Heard verdict, I got a little hot under the collar. By the way, I am a woman and a feminist. It is really pissing me off that Amber Heard's attorneys and some in the media are making this into a case where a woman is not being believed just because she's a woman. Does this happen? Yes. But is it happening in this case? No. Amber Heard has been her own worst enemy, and she is dragging all women down with her. But I also agree with you that the online bullying of Amber Heard is abominable. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things with the verdict episode that I published upon, I sort of rewatched the beginning, is that I started with the, shall we say, pro-Amber side of things. And I could see that people that don't know me or can't tolerate that would be hard for them to listen to. I probably should have had a more kind of back and forth in the beginning and then provided, so to speak, all sides. So there's that. But the other thing is what you're saying, patron from Arizona, is that the lawyers, her attorneys and Amber herself, their narrative to the press is that this is yet another woman that isn't being believed. This is a backslide of the Me Too movement. And what I'll say to that is the Me Too movement was not about gender. It was related to gender. It had gender elements. It had sexist components, absolutely. Misogynistic components, absolutely. Oppression of women, absolutely. The Me Too movement was for people saying, me too, I was a victim of abuse, regardless of gender. We understand that, right? The Me Too movement is not a women's movement. It is a victims movement. And everyone should say, Me Too is about victims. Now, of course, if you're Amber Heard or her legal team and you're trying to save face, or you really believe in your case, which is likely, then this is kind of a backslide for Me Too, because to them, a victim has been disbelieved and punished and bullied online, which is, of course, is wrong under any circumstances to be bullied. But the Me Too movement, for me, this furthers the Me Too movement, because if Johnny Depp was a victim, which a lot of people agree, including the jury, then this provides a major case in the Me Too movement for men, not only just for male victims, but also for male victims who are accused falsely of being the perpetrator, which is a whole other element to the Me Too movement, right? This is the Me Too movement. Johnny Depp, justice for Johnny Depp / Me Too. Like, Johnny Depp is saying Me Too. Okay? So to claim that this is a backslide for women, and a lot of people will email in and comments like, hey, Amber, I'm a woman. Don't drag me into your camp. Like, you're not speaking for me, because I don't feel like this is a backslide for me as a woman. I feel like this is a step forward for all of us in terms of people being able to come forward who are victimized, even when they're being accused of being a perpetrator. So now, if you believe Amber Heard was a victim, then it's completely flipped. This is a backslide. So it just depends on what you believe in. I can understand a lot of different points of view to the case. But yeah, so anonymous patron in Arizona, you're just like getting hot under the collar because of the way this is being framed. Now, and I find that some people online, even famous, prominent people who are saying these kinds of things, my suspicion is they didn't really watch the trial. So when I see those tweets or those news reports of some prominent person saying like, this is a backslide for women and this is a backslide for me too, I'm like, did you watch the trial? Because I don't know if anyone watching the trial would say that Amber was clearly a victim of Johnny Depp's abuse. Like, I don't know if anyone rationally could say that if they actually watched a significant amount of the trial. That's a really hard perspective to believe if you've actually... Now, if you haven't watched the trial, then, yeah, you wouldn't know what happened, right? So, yeah, you know, and to put a fine point on it, I could see someone watching the trial and being and trying to be as objective as possible and concluding that it was pretty equal in terms of the abuse. You'd have to believe that Amber Heard was lying about some things, but not a lot of things, which is totally possible, by the way. Just because she was clearly lying or seemingly lying about some things doesn't mean she was lying about everything. Not at all. It could mean she was lying about everything, or at least spinning everything, but it's hard to know. So it's reasonable for someone to conclude that Amber was telling the truth with some of it. And if you believe some of it, then yikes. Johnny Depp was absolutely doing some horrific things to her. And so I could see someone legitimately and reasonably concluding that it was equal. Maybe hers was more frequent, but his in moments could be very severe. So could hers. Anyway, I could also see someone completely concluding that he never abused her. That would be reasonable as well, except for verbal. All right, Depp Heard 37, the grumpy episode. Carol says, we always called it making bones, because I was talking about, you know, stinky and grumpy. So Carol said, we called it making bones, which is so weird, she says. Maddie says, my family is from Pakistan, and growing up, we called number one susu, which is kind of similar to what I said. Oh, so I was saying shishi, right? And Josie says, in Cantonese as kids, we said shushu for pee because it's the sound that it makes, and chow chow for poo, meaning stinky stinky. It makes perfect sense to me. Maybe grumpy is the face you make when you teach a child to push it out. Yeah, make your grumpy face. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's interesting to hear. You know, I'm glad people commented about that because, you know, shishi, susu in Pakistan, and then shushu in China. It's like there must be something about that, right? It's sort of like how mama and papa, that label for mom and dad, it seems to be kind of present in all languages, because not all obviously, but in many, because it's the easiest syllables for an infant to say. And again, mama, papa, she, su, shu, shu, chow, chow. There's some, probably it's easier for children to know, or anyway, yeah. And I think that might actually be where it comes from, or at least, I don't know if I heard that, but for Japanese Americans, she, maybe it's like, that's what it sounds like. You know, shh. Kirsten says, the maid found the grumpy in the bed and she was really upset, so she took a picture and sent it to the house manager. She knows, as the maid, what dog poop looks like and how big it is. She knows it couldn't have come from a 5-pound teacup Yorkie. Plus, the covers were pulled over the poop to hide it, so a dog didn't do that. Plus, Amber raged at the maid and accused her of sabotaging her relationship with Johnny and told her she needed to fix it or that she might not have a job anymore. Yeah, interesting. I think that's from the UK trial. That's interesting. Yeah, if the sheet was over... Again, I know enough about life and about assumptions and evidence to know that even if we had all those details correct, we couldn't say with 100% certainty that she did a... What do you call it? You call it... We don't know that she made bones in the bed. Depp Heard 38, Ms. Prissy says, The video of Johnny slamming cabinets was when he found out a friend of his was stealing millions. She then recorded and made her voice small, asking, "What's going on?" knowing he was robbed. That's why he asked her, "Did something happen to you this morning?" That's why he asked her, "Did something happen to you this morning?" She snickered at the end of the video when she pulled the iPad out of the trash after recording him in a vulnerable moment. Yeah, I heard that, not that amount of detail, but that he was upset about some other issue, and that's why he was slamming the cabinets. He wasn't angry at her. And okay, that does add nuance to it for sure, which is helpful for me to know. But there's still that element at the end where he grabs the iPad from her and throws it away. Is that a horrible act? No. But I have to say, I wouldn't have done that. Like, if I was upset, that's always one thing to think about is, what would I have done? Because how would I have felt about that? So if, for example, I was upset, which, happens, and I was stomping around or something, and my wife took out a thing to record me, and I noticed it, I wouldn't grab the thing and aggressively and throw it away in a garbage can. I'd just be like, "What are you doing? Like, how are you filming me?" So I don't know what that says. It says something to me, kind of. Does it say Johnny Depp is guilty? No, but it just says something. But having the detail that he wasn't upset at her, he was upset at something else allegedly, then that does add. And if she was recording complete, so a possibility based on these details is he's super upset, he's slamming things around, he's really angry, and all Amber has to do is just go to her office or let him just stomp around, which is, I think, what a lot of people would do if their partner was in a situation like that. Or they might just say, "Wow, sounds rough," or just like, "Yeah, I can't believe that happened to you. That's some serious bullcrap right there." But instead, what she does, if we go off this storyline, she's like, "Haha, I'm going to film him, and I'm going to claim that he was abusing me." And I think someone even said that she released that video to TMZ or something, which, if we believe that narrative, that is awful. And then if you take the whole narrative as truth, that she was the abuser the entire time, then my God, right? But there are other explanations. Liv says she set up that video secretly to record, and it's TMZ, yeah. Therapy Nerd says, "I'm very surprised you skipped over the end of the last audio." Yeah, so it's just another one of those people saying, "You skipped over." And I'm like, I don't know, maybe I did. I don't know. I didn't mean to. Linda, because the other thing is that I'm depending on the internet to provide me with the trial, and I don't know if they're editing it. And so sometimes I'll be watching a video and I'm thinking, did they skip over something? And I don't know how to figure it out. Now most of the time there's this one channel where it's just 8 hours without any breaks. And so those are usually the video. Anyway, Linz says, "I have sent many vile, horrible, descriptive texts to my best friend." So this is me talking about how Johnny Depp did send those really vile texts. So Linz is saying, "I have sent many vile, horrible, descriptive texts to my best friend, ranting and raving about the things I want to happen to people I despise. I want to happen to people I despise. That doesn't mean I'm going to go through with any of it, but for me, I have to get that stuff out or it makes me icky inside. Once I rant to my friend and word vomit, as I like to call it, then I feel better and move on with my day." Yeah, absolutely. So for you, if that's how it works and you say those extremely vile things and you would never act on them, then okay, that's one thing. But when I treat perpetrators and people who are at the very least verbally abusive, those kinds of vile texts are a part of that pattern. But I don't know about Johnny. Depherd 39. Julie says, "I've always said that I struggle with being hyper independent because since a young age, No one came to my aid when I needed them to. Right, so I was talking about avoidant attachment. I don't ask for help because what's the point? People don't come. Slowly through therapy, I've been trying to learn to be less independent, but it's hard. There's also a fear of being abandoned. So if I don't rely on anyone, I can't be disappointed then. It's a hard habit to shake. Absolutely. So Julie, you're describing avoidant attachment very effectively, and I'm glad you're in therapy. I don't know if you suffer from avoidant attachment, but it certainly sounds like it. And it is really hard. Even when you know it, it's so hard. You have to, it's like having a phobia to snakes or jumping out of a plane, you know, with a parachute. You might know it's okay, but your body doesn't know it's okay. And that's really the trick. You have to train your body to be okay with being vulnerable and for asking for help. And yeah, you're saying there's also a fear of being abandoned. That is actually at the core of avoidant attachment. It's not this I'm independent feeling. It's I need to be independent because I will be abandoned if I depend on other people. Strawberry says, your analysis of avoidant personality was really interesting. Just chiming in here, it wasn't avoidant personality. It's different than avoidant attachment. They're actually extremely different. I don't think I'm a narcissist, but I often don't ask for help because I don't trust anyone else to be reliable or care about me. I had a very unreliable childhood with betrayal and pain. Thank you for bringing that up. Maybe I'll talk to my counselor about it. Yeah, Strawberry, you absolutely should. It's a major part of your issues, your avoidant attachment. If you have it, I would absolutely talk with your therapist about it. So I'm glad that you're thinking about that. Lennis says, Dr. Honda, did you watch Johnny's redirect? So, actually, this is interesting. He explained the cut myself audio. It had nothing to do with self-harm. I actually don't remember that. So I'm going to try to rewatch that because that is something that I'm very curious about. Whether I'll react to it or not, I don't know. But his explanation of that scene with the knife. Now, could he be lying? Absolutely. Could he not even remember? I mean, that's the whole thing about Johnny Depp's testimony to me is that there's a good chance that all of those, or a majority of those experiences he remembers through a massive opaque haze of his drug abuse and particularly his alcohol use. You know, he could claim that he's a very, calm drunk. What do they call it? People who can drink a lot of alcohol and not seem like they're intoxicated, but that doesn't have anything to do with the effect it has on your memory and encoding and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. Maybe he remembers everything accurately, but there's a lot to be kind of skeptical of. Depp Herd 40, Julia says, Dr. Honda, your discussions of BPD encouraged me to get professional help. And because of that, I've just been diagnosed with BPD, borderline personality disorder, like 3 days ago. I'm so ready to get help. Thank you so much. Well, Julia, that's great. So I'm so glad that you're getting the help that you deserve and that you're with a therapist that understands that. There's a long road of recovery, but it's so worth it. And I'm so happy for you, Julia. There's so much happiness and contentment that can be found along that path. So I'm really happy for you. Boglarka says, I think I never acknowledged how much time and effort it would take to edit and cut these reaction videos with the regular uploads you have. If you do all of that on your own, Dr. Kirk, that's an enormous task every day. Maybe you can employ someone to edit the videos in the future, and then you could focus on the fun stuff. Yeah, so in this video, I must have been bothering you with my complaining about how much, or telling you how much time it takes to do this kind of stuff. And so one, I have always thought about employing someone to do editing because it's a fairly common enough expertise thing that there's enough people out there that you could pay them to do it, and they could do it relatively well, but they wouldn't do it the way that I want them. Like the most, if not all, the episodes, all the content that I've created over 14 years has been carefully molded. I'll record all this stuff, and there's a lot of footage, and then I select and massage stuff in a certain way so that it's the way that I want it to be. And if I hired someone to do that, they wouldn't know what I wanted. They would edit it based on general principles of editing, but not editing based on what I believe is responsible, ethical, sound, intelligent commentary, And so I am very meticulous, particularly about the trial videos, because there's so much expertise that I'm spouting that I want it to be extremely buttoned up. So I've thought about it for a long time about trying to get someone, and I just don't think it's possible. Maybe if I had a fellow researcher or clinician, scientist, psychologist who also edited video and knew about the media landscape, because that's the other thing is like you have to understand the media landscape. You have to understand YouTube and the way people language things, and you have to be able to catch things that I say that's, well, that might come across as a little wrong, and so and plus I'm too paranoid. I'm too worried that someone else is gonna edit it wrong or something wonky is gonna happen, and so I edit it, and it's my own grave that I'm digging, but and I don't mind editing. It just takes a long time. I've always actually kind of enjoyed editing. I have a very fast way of doing it relative to me before. So, but it just takes a lot of time. That's all. And it makes me feel better once I publish something, because I feel like I've really scrutinized everything, and I'm like, okay, this feels good enough to put out there. Mary says, I find the codependency part of this video very interesting in relation to this trial. Yeah, I did too, Mary. In a few of the audios between Heard and Depp, you can hear Amber giving Johnny Xanax or pouring him wine. Yeah. Something in me wondered if she was trying to keep him dependent on her, so he needs her to help him with his sobriety. Yeah, so the codependency has two prongs that are happening simultaneously. One is what you said, which is that the codependent person needs the dependent person to be dependent on them. Otherwise, they feel the codependent person doesn't feel like they have any worth, or that they're going to lose their relationship. And so they need the dependent person to be, the problem needs to stay in place. But this is largely subconscious. The conscious prong of it is this absolute compulsion to take care of someone else because they feel like their only worth is being helpful to someone as they're taking care of them. And so they're both being altruistic and manipulative at the exact same time. And the manipulation is actually completely out of their awareness. So that's the codependent conundrum. Vey says, and of course you talk to the codependent people about their codependency, and they're like, no, you don't understand. My partner is completely screwed up. They can't do anything on their own. But that's their conscious awareness of the situation. They're not aware of the unconscious manipulation. And the dependent person is often equally playing a part in the dependency cycle by sabotaging themselves, because they often believe their only worth is when someone is taking care of them as they're screwing up their lives. Anyway, Vey says, do some general practitioners in medicine really diagnose ADHD and give meds in office? I was diagnosed last year at 29, and I had to pay hundreds of dollars to go to a specialist to be thoroughly tested before my psychiatrist would treat me for it. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what you went through, Vey, is the standard and is much more sound in terms of actually making sure that you have a legitimate brain issue of executive function in nature, and that the medication would help you with that. So it's good that you went through that. But yeah, some people will find that their primary family doc will just diagnose them with ADHD in literally 2 minutes and prescribe a psychostimulant. And yeah, I think it's happening less and less, but it still happens. And in some ways, that's a bad thing, because you will end up treating people that don't actually have ADHD. And, there are side effects to these psychostimulants. Not severe side effects, but some. And particularly for children. But it also, if we have the pro to having this general practitioner practice, is that more people with ADHD can get help, right? Because not everyone can afford what you went through or even have access to it. Crystal says, I would be very interested in a deep dive about the difference between borderline and bipolar. Your comment about the two was fascinating. Yeah, I don't think a deep dive is necessary. I'll just keep repeating it. With bipolar, you have mania, you have cycles. So you don't have that with bipolar, with borderline. What I say? I think that's the problem, is they're so close in phonetically. With borderline, sorry, with bipolar, with two poles, you have depression and mania, and you have cycling. And mania is very particular. It is obvious when you see it. And I could explain it to y'all, but, you know, person doesn't sleep. Often they don't sleep. They're very active. They have a lot of grand ideas. They will make a lot of changes in their lives. They are extremely motivated. They get a lot of things done. They never stop doing things. This is usually hypomania. Actual mania is, I'm a god. I can do anything. I can just walk into people's houses because my friends are my friends and everything's cool. I'm above the law. They might even become delusional, like, you know, the CIA is after me, this kind of stuff. So it's mania. It's very easy to detect. You might not really get it in your heart hearing the description, but if you've had any experience with someone with bipolar, it's very clear and obvious. Depression is also pretty obvious as well, but if you see depression, it's not, you don't know if they have bipolar or not. But if you see mania, then in all likelihood, it's bipolar. Borderline, there's none of that stuff. So with borderline, you have attachment schema that get triggered, triggered by very obvious things like relationships or being fired from a job or or your best friend not texting you back. You know, very obvious triggers that result in extreme emotional dysregulation and a lot of anger, perhaps, and depression. And so, I don't know, it's just a completely different thing. And I don't understand why anyone would mix those up. And someone, because I've been talking about this for a long time, and someone emailed in one time, and I remember thinking, oh, okay, I can kind of see that. The one place where it would be hard to tell the difference would be in an ER, in an emergency room situation, in a triage situation. If someone is very dysregulated, it'd be hard to differentiate from mania, from mania, and someone who is who is borderline going through some sort of triggering event, or even just someone with complex PTSD. Honestly, there's a lot of things it could look like, but to me, it'd be like saying, you know, someone comes in with a headache and you're like, well, with a severe headache, you know, they have a month of just like a straight headache for a month. And it'd be like a physician, I'm not a physician, but it'd be like a physician saying like, oh, that's cancer. It's like, well, it could be cancer, but it also could be, so it's like to see a few signs of mania and be like, oh, it's bipolar. I'm like, well, it could be bipolar, but you need more time to figure that out. Anyway, so yeah, I feel like it doesn't need a deep dive. Now, if you believe otherwise, like there's some sort of massive overlap between these conditions that I'm somehow just missing, feel free to email me some details about that. But so I'm open to that, because if so many people are messing this up, and they actually understand, because that's the thing, a lot of people don't understand bipolar. Even more people don't understand borderline. So I'm not surprised that people get it mixed up, because they don't understand either condition. I mean, borderline is complicated. Bipolar is also complicated. All right, 90 Day Fiance, George and Anfisa, number 7. Chanel says, please don't Google what's up with this couple now, LOL. I want to see your reaction when that part comes up. Yeah, I purposely don't Google or look at anything, because I don't want anything ruined just for my own enjoyment. I don't want to know. It's like reading the last page of a book. You don't want to do that to yourself, right? Good old Lean Donut says, you're in trouble when Kirk goes for the thesaurus. Yeah. George and Anfisa, number 8. Fruity says, before discovering your videos, I was trying to follow common dating advice for women that was all about being a high-value woman or a challenge for men. The goal would be to act icy and cold with men. Since watching your videos, I questioned this advice because I feel like this attracts avoidant attachment partners who trigger me to act in preoccupied ways. Now, I would much rather communicate my feelings and not play power games. I saw some other comments asking similar questions about this topic. Maybe it would be a cool idea to talk about it. Yeah, I've talked about it a fair amount in my audio podcast episodes, but in a nutshell, yeah, the majority of advice online is bad, or at least let's just say a good proportion of it. It's usually based on power games. Like for heterosexual women, it's the stuff you're talking about, play hard to get. For men, sometimes it's the exact same message, or it's coming across as alpha and dominant and this kind of stuff. And it's because people feel powerless and they want to feel powerful. And so they confuse the whole situation for a solution of power, which is not the solution. Yeah, you feel powerless. It's just part of the situation. You don't have power over other people. You just don't. And it makes you feel powerless. Okay, just say, I feel powerless. And I don't need to feel powerful. That's okay. I can be powerless over other people. I can be powerless over dating. I can be powerless over the beginning stages of a love, intimate, romantic relationship. I'm completely powerless. I accept that. And I don't need to gain any power. It's okay. It's inherent. So the other thing is that I understand the impulse of various different people online providing this advice and adhering to it because, you know, you've been hurt, and it's comforting to pull back and to say like, well, you know, I put myself out there and I got rejected last time, so I'm going to pull back this time. And if you want to do that, that's okay. But it's not like the way to navigate the beginning of a relationship, because as you said, you might attract the wrong person. So to me, I've always said, you know, be vulnerable as long as you're comfortable at whatever stage you're comfortable with. You might even in the beginning say, I want to be vulnerable with you right now, but I'm not really comfortable, so just give me some time. You know, you can say stuff like that. So, and if someone runs away from you, then they're probably not for you. I react to a lot of videos where people will cry on a date or something, and there's always this wisdom. It's like, oh, that's ridiculous. You can't cry at a date. And I'm like, why? Like, imagine for y'all, because of who you are, you're a clinician, you have emotional maturity, or you've been watching my videos and you've been convinced of this, that crying is actually extremely human and normal. Imagine on the first date, the person you're dating, they cry a little bit. You know, they're not falling apart, but they have a little memory of something, a cat that died recently, or a breakup that happened 5 years ago, or a death in the family. And, you know, they cry a little bit. You know, I'm sorry, I'm crying. That's a keeper right there, right? So these rules, now, if you don't want to cry on the first date, totally fine. And if it turns you off, I guess that's your prerogative. But the kinds of, so what are you supposed to be looking for when you first start dating someone? The lack of crying? Like, why would that be on your list? And yeah, if your love life hasn't been going well, maybe it's because of that. Goretti says, regarding the romantic expectations, I'm from a different culture. Where I'm from, exaggerated expressions of love are very normal and highly expected. Right, so I was talking about how with Anfisa and with Larissa and Colt, remember, there was this real, a lot of criticism towards the American white guy because they didn't have flowers. This guy. I'm talking, so in my country, in my culture, it's expected. I'm talking about cringeworthy public expressions of love, like showing up with a band, oversized stuffed bears, handmade collages of romantic moments, and of course, flowers always for no reason and for every occasion. For these couples, not showing up with tokens of affection is a big deal and an indication that the affection is not there. Well, that's interesting. You know, Goretti, you know, thanks for telling me that, because it seems quite obvious when you put it that way, but I never knew that or thought about that. I just, of course, there are different cultures around that sort of thing. And it really does change the way that I see Anfisa and Larissa and others, because in the United States, mainstream culture is you can do that if you want to, but you certainly don't have to. And you just being there with a hug and a kiss is enough to express affection. You don't have to show up with, particularly every time, right? But you're saying that that's the expression of love. That's their love language, if you will. And yeah, okay. Well, then the counter to that is, if you're coming to the States, then you should know that there's a different culture there. The other counter to that counter is, if you're dating someone from a culture that values that, you should probably show up with flowers. Anyway, Emily and Kobe, number 3. Sry says, watching Emily has been hard for me because I know I have a bad habit of micromanaging my husband. It's so much easier to see why that behavior is harmful and super annoying from the outside. It's pretty embarrassing to me. I'm hoping this realization helps me to stop. Yeah, Sry, I'm so glad, or Srymia, Scorpio? I'm so glad that you can admit that to yourself, because that is the road to recovery, is admitting to yourself. And, it's embarrassing, but we all have that. I went through a lot of this embarrassment, self-realization in my mid-20s when I was with a therapist that I asked around for a therapist that would kick my ass, because I didn't want someone to just listen. I wanted someone to really kind of confront me. And boy, did I find someone that would confront me, and he did every week. And he was validating and supportive, but he would really go after me, because that's what I wanted. And I went through a lot of those moments with him. I was like, oh, like there's still some moments where I'm like, wow. But I'm glad that he said it, because no one else was saying it, and I need to know that about myself. And so yeah, it doesn't feel great, but it's liberating, because now you can actually begin to change it. You can actually stop micromanaging your husband and stop being like Emily. Kara, speaking of another micromanager, and Guillermo, number 2, Alicia says, raising kids with a mindset of competition is traumatizing. Right, so I was talking about how Kara felt like she was a loser at 29, and I went on a riff about how kids are raised these days, young people are raised these days with a tremendous overblown expectations. Raising kids with a mindset of competition is traumatizing kids. I teach college sophomores and juniors at a large private university. Many of them feel burnt out, like their lives have already passed them by because they didn't change the world by the time they were 21. Yeah, Alicia, I've seen the same thing. It's really awful. Zukra says, I went to high school in Bellevue, which is near Seattle, Bellevue, Washington. The school you described sounds a lot like the one I went to. We had a wall with people's names and which college they were going to. Although it is a public school, there definitely was a lot of academic pressure and competition. Yeah, so the school that I was at was ICS in Kirkland. I'm guessing that your school in Bellevue, which is right next to Kirkland, is very similar to ICS. It might even be another type of ICS school, because I know that in that region there are a lot of international schools anyway. And yeah, you describe the school, ICS, at least when I used to work with them a lot, they are a public school, but if you didn't know they were public, you would think they were private, because the amount of pride that the students and the teachers put into the school, the high level of academics in this public school, the list to try to get into that school is so long. It's really hard to get into that. It's like the college prep high school, even though it's a public school. And a lot of the kids go to Ivy League schools, and there was this thing, and I mean, I would hear these 8th graders talking, because ICS is 6th through 12th, and I would hear very young kids talking about Harvard or this kind of thing, and I'm like, how do you even know you want to go to college? Like, you don't know at that age, and why are you even thinking about that? You should be like going to parties and making a fool out of yourself. You shouldn't be thinking about these sorts of things. I mean, I barely thought. I'm not saying my life is the model, but I'll tell you, when I was in high school, I figured I would go to college. Me and my friends, we were all pretty much going to go to college, and my sister went to college, and so I'm going to go to college anyway. So, but in fact, my mom wanted me to go to a fancy school in Ithaca, New York. I think it might have even been Ithaca University or something, I don't know. And my mom was like, hey, you should, look at these pamphlets. The campus looks great. The education looks amazing. And I'm like, Mom, it's a private school. It's going to cost like 10 times as much as a local university. And Mom's like, but it looks so great. It looks like it'd be a really great community. And I'm like, that's a waste of money. And so I just went to University of Washington, which is a top-notch university in the world, but it's very cheap comparatively because it's a state school, particularly back then. Tuition was very low back then, and there were a lot of taxes to pay for it, to bring tuition down for people because democracy, but that's been stripped away and tuition has been rising because of that to some extent. But anyway, I didn't have any internal pressure to go to a fancy school. None of my friends were talking about that. I just saw it as a money thing. It's like, well, education's education. Who cares? So it's the closest, biggest university. It's cheap. I'll just go there. And it worked out fine, and I'm glad I did that. So, yeah, I just don't. Now, we're talking about the privileged group of people. Typically, anyway. Yeah, we have to put an end to that because as you're saying, 19-year-olds or 21-year-olds to believe that their life is over or that they're a loser because they haven't changed the world yet. Yeah, I've seen that before. I'll see like 26-year-olds and they'll just be like, oh, I'm such a loser. A friend of mine, she just got married and she has kids and she's like an associate at her law firm and I'm just over here like working at Microsoft. I'm such a loser. And I'm just like, compare yourself to just what could be. You should also be very grateful that you have a job to begin with. Like there's so many things you could be identifying as like glorious aspects of your life. You have a home. It's small, but you're in your 20s. You have a pet, you have a partner, you have a car. It's a crappy car, but you have a car. You have a job. You have a career path. You have education. You have support. You're succeeding, and that's often the kind of tact I'll take. I'll be like, instead of looking at the glass half full, let's look at what you've accomplished by this time. You went all the way through kindergarten. You went all the way through first grade. You went all the way through, and then you got into a college and you went to university and you tried really hard and you worked and then look at all the things you've done. You could have at any time decided to not do any of those things and to take the easier route. You put in the investment. You're working hard and you're thinking, and so you're accomplishing things. But there's such this propaganda on kids, and we always have to look at systems. So when I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain this. I don't have a lot of time, but the system of parents, society, employers, capitalism, politicians, teachers, administrators. There's no one in there that will say the things that I'm saying, or very few will say what I'm saying. So you have parents that are taught by society that their entire worth is based on their children's grades. People don't have bumper stickers that say, my kid is a great kid. They have bumper stickers that say, my kid is an honor student, right? So, and maybe they do have bumper stickers, but the majority of bumper stickers that you put on your car about your kids is like honor student stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's something unbalanced about that is the pinnacle of your pride as a parent, that your kid got into Harvard or your kid got a 4.0 or your kid is now a physician or something. And, you can be proud for sure, but if that's all you're proud of and that's what most of your energy is poured into, so the parents are giving into society by participating in this pressuring of the kids and sending all those messages to the child. The teachers obviously are biased for education because they're teachers. So they have a really hard time, I find, because I've actually had arguments with teachers along these lines. Because I'll say, like, look, education is important, but it is far below other priorities for children. So if we're going to sacrifice something, let's sacrifice education. Who cares? We want a well-balanced, emotionally stable, someone with self-esteem, someone who's attuned to, someone that believes in themselves, That's what we want. Someone who has support, someone that is safe. And education is way below that stuff. But for a lot of teachers, education is the answer to every problem because, of course, they're teachers. So they're going to do that. And so the teachers have their point of view. And, of course, teachers hang out with other teachers, right? And the admin is all part of that. And then the teachers talk to the parents, and so they're all conspiring on this propaganda. And then, of course, you have the capitalists and the businesses. They want that too. They don't want kids that are emotionally balanced. They want kids that are productive, that know things, that can make profit for them. And so they also participate in the propaganda. And, of course, the politicians are in the pocket of the capitalists, and so they're going to So the entire system is propped up on this propaganda that education and success in academics and in professional life is the only way you can find self-esteem and worth in our society and in your heart. And when you have a system that does that, then you get what you get. So we have to change the system, right? And we have to fight the system. We have to actively fight against it. So as a parent, unless you're fighting against that propaganda, your kid is suffering from that. And it's hard to do because you have to say to your kid, I'm glad you're concerned about school, but you understand it's not the only thing. I want you to do well, and that's great. And it's good to learn and work hard, get into a good school, all that stuff. But understand that that's low on the priority list. How are you feeling? How are you doing? And then there's this compromise that people will make and be like, oh, okay, so I've got to get into sports, and I've got to get into a hiking club, and I've got to start to do art, and they'll make an academic exercise out of these other activities instead of just like, who am I? How do I feel? What do I want? Am I having fun? Is my life fulfilling? That's the other thing. You'll have 26-year-olds, 29-year-olds that have been living their lives on a lie, and suddenly they're like, I hate my life. I've been striving for this thing. I finally got there, or I'm almost there, and I'm not happy because they never were nurtured regarding even pursuing a fulfilling life, a happy, balanced life. So yeah, we have to fight the system, and it's gonna be hard. It's like fighting the system of racism or capitalism or ageism or sexism. It's hard. You can protect your kids a lot, but you're not going to be able to protect them from racism, sexism, and ableism. You're not going to be able to do that, but you can do your part. And if you're a teacher, you want to do your part. If you're a business owner, and some business owners are like this, they don't put profit at the top. They put the humans at the top, and the profit is a distant priority. It's there. Profit is important, and trying to stay afloat financially is important. But the humans in the organization are number one. And you'll see some organizations that will do this. Now, of course, stockholders don't want you to do that. And if it is a public company, then that CEO might lose their position because they're not driving profit. But anyway, so that's my rant about that. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.